All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to get started. I want to welcome you to our first session of The Good, the Bad, and the Lovely Plants. And this is a combined effort by a number of extension educators in horticulture with the University of Illinois Extension, and we're really excited to be able to offer this to you. And this is part one. And we're going to cover common invasive species and species of concern and control methods. And the second session will be on February 24th. My name is Kari Hool, and I'm located over in West Central Illinois. And joining me on this first half of the session is Andrew Holsinger. And so I'm going to get us started. And again, we're really excited. We will take pause for questions at the end of each segment. And you can either type your questions into the chat box, or you can unmute your phone and ask that way. And we're really excited to be able to offer this. So again, if you have questions, just put them into the chat box or unmute your phones and ask when we get to that session. So to get started, we're going to talk about what do we define as invasive plants and what we can define as species of concern. And invasive plants, according to the Illinois Invasive Species Council, is with respect to a particular ecosystem, any species that's not native to that ecosystem, including seeds, spores, or other biological material capable of propagating that species, and that introduction is going to cause harm to the economy or environment. Now, what we're defining as species of concerns are non-native plants. Plants are not native to the U.S. or the area that have the potential for becoming invasive, and therefore we really want to make sure that we monitor the species and that instead of using that, we look towards alternatives. And the February 24th session will be covering some of all those alternatives and pollinator plants. Now, one of the other things we wanted to make sure we were kind of clear on is this concept of what also is a noxious weed. So there's quite a few different definitions, and according to the USDA, a noxious weed is defined as an undesirable plant that infests either land or water resources and causes physical or economic damage. Now, in regards to that, Illinois has both a Illinois Exotic Weed Act and a noxious weed law. And with those, we are not supposed to distribute, sell, or put any part of that plant anywhere without a permit, if at all usable. And that includes things like purple loosestrife, kudzu, some of our bigger plants that are somewhat of an issue that we have seen that were brought over that are non-native. And so most of those on the Illinois Noxious Weed List or Invasive Weed List, Exotic Weed Act, my apologies, are not available for sale. And we are going to cover at least a few of those tonight. But if you have more questions, you can actually go online and find more information. Yeah. Now, in regards to what we're going to look at tonight in regards to plants is the bush honeysuckles, Pyrus caloriana, the calorie pear, which is we're labeling a species of concern, Lythrum salicaria, which is purple loosestrife, Celestris orbiculatus, which is Oriental bittersweet, winter creeper euonymus, which is a species of concern. It's not necessarily recognized as invasive, but we are watching it, and also burning bush, very, very common landscape because of its its desirable traits of that bright red fall color. So we're going to go over these 6 tonight, and then we're going to eventually get to some controls. And this is just a quick slide showing some of the invasive plants we're going to talk about. And some of them you're going to probably recognize. You've probably seen either in the landscape or you've seen out, if you've taken a walk in the woods. And so being aware of what these are and what we need to look for is really important. So this first cluster of plants is Lonicera macchii, the Tartarica, the Axbella, and the Moroi. And these are bush honeysuckles, and these are native to Asia and the Eurasia area. And when we brought them here as an ornamental. We thought they would be great for wildlife. We thought they'd be great for erosion control. And yes, some of those features they were good for. And the seed's very readily distributed by birds. But what we see with this plant is it really crowds out native species, and it's one of the reasons it's so good is that it's very tolerant of sun and shade conditions, so that it's able to choke out those native plants because it just takes up and competes. Now, with this plant, you probably are pretty used to seeing some of that big white flower and some of the other colors that go with that. Now, there are native honeysuckles. And of the cluster we have, Amber is the most common for the invasive species. And of course, when you're looking at them and trying to figure out how do I look at these and how are they different? Our invasive honeysuckles usually get 6 to 15 feet, usually are multi-stemmed. And the big thing is if you cut into the older stems, and if you look at the picture at the top right, you see how there's that hollow center, and that's a hollow pith. The invasive species on older stems have that hollow pith. So if you cut into it with a pair of pruners, you're going to see that dead-looking center area. It's not. It's just a hollow pith. It's part of the plant structure. If you look at our native honeysuckles, they have solid pith in those older stems. Usually we have bright red fruits in pairs of 4 or in pairs, and birds very big favor of these. It's a pretty heavy seed set, and you think about all those flowers you see are going to be turning into berries, and the birds are hugely favoritism of them. When identifying, look for opposite and entire leaves, and you'll look at the margin and be able to see those. Showy fragrant flowers, the kind of tan stringy bark, and you'll be able to walk through the woods and really be able to see some of that, in the spring. Go out and look. And one of the things we've seen as part of our problem with the bush honeysuckles is because the way they have grown, it's actually detrimental for birds that set up nest within them. They're a little bit closer to the ground. They actually make it easier for predators to get to their nests. So it's actually detrimental also to our native wildlife. So if we want to continue on, one of the other things, here's a great example in this slide of just showing that opposite leaves. So when you look at the leaves, they're opposite one another on the stem. And you can see those bright red berries. Again, those berries come in pairs or in clusters of 4. Now, I wanted to make sure to share with you, we already talked about the difference between, the pith on the invasive honeysuckle compared to that of the native honeysuckle. We know that there is a solid pith in native honeysuckle, and we know that there is a solid pith in native honeysuckle, and then there's a hole within the one in the native ones. And so in this slide, you're going to actually see there are 2 native honeysuckles to the area. And we have fly honeysuckle and northern bush honeysuckle, and they have the solid pith. And the big difference, too, if you look at the leaves, is there is fine hairs on the leaf margins of native honeysuckle, but there is not on your invasive honeysuckle. And you can also see when you're looking at the seed capsules in the top left picture and the bottom right, you can see they're very distinctively different from what we were seeing in the previous slides of those invasives. And usually there's white flowers in one and yellow to red in the other. So the flowers are not always the best way to tell. You really need to look at some of these other features just to make sure you know exactly what you're looking at and whether or not they're native. So, bush honeysuckles are just one. If you look into a lot of our native areas and try to figure out what you're looking at, you're going to see these in the spring, and really take a look at some of those leaves, and you see a lot of our native areas are really invaded by a lot of these plants. And so the next one that I want to cover is calorie pear. And calorie pear was very widely used in the 1900s as a landscape tree. We loved it. It was great. Great, gorgeous white flowers in the spring. And, we're like, this is great because it's not self-compatible. It won't do seed set. Well, we kind of discovered that it is not it's self-incompatible, which means it cannot self-pollinate to create fruit, but it can cross-pollinate with other pears. And so all of a sudden we were starting to see pears that were producing fruit that should not have been able to produce fruit before. And we're starting to see them in native areas. And where I'm at, I'll drive down the highway in the spring and I'm seeing pear trees in bloom going, I know they are not usually there. That is not where they are supposed to be. And so we are starting to see this as a species of concern, and it's one of those ones that also when we look at how that plant also is structured, just the stability of it, it's also a weaker structured plant. It has a habit of falling apart, it gets some fire blight issues, and there are a lot of better alternative plants out there, and it's not has the level of invasiveness that we've seen in honeysuckle, but it is creating a problem. Some of you may already be quite familiar with what calorie pear looks like. And again, it's very easy to identify those white flowers in the spring, a lot of upright growth usually, and very glossy green leaves. And in the top right corner, you can see a great example of what that fruit set looks like when it comes to pears. It kind of is these small, tan, hard-looking, balls that have seed set. They do have the ability to propagate, and that's part of the problem. And another really great example is what we can look at is that fall color, and that's part of the reason we loved these when we put them in the landscape. It was this great, gorgeous, dark burgundy color, and we always want those plants that have multiple seasons of interest, and this really did fit the bill when we were trying to find plants to stick in the landscape. So with that, the next one I want to cover is purple loosestrife. And purple loosestrife is one, again, it was an ornamental plant that we brought over from Europe, and was brought around the 1800s. And you can see in this picture just the gorgeous purple blooms on it, and of course, we as gardeners and people who enjoy plants want that. Now, the problem became its ability to set an unbelievable amount of seeds and its ability to propagate. Now, I want to make sure you understand that the purple loosestrife is on the Illinois Exotic Weed Act, and it is illegal to buy, sell, distribute, or plant any part of this species. And what we see is it's very aggressive and takes over wet habitats, ditches, riverbanks, and it does it very, very efficiently, and it's very good at choking out native plants and native habitats. And on your screen you're probably already reading, a single flower stalk of purple loosestrife can produce 300,000 seeds, and we're talking 24 billion seeds per acre potential. And when you think about that in perspective of potential seed viability and invasive tendencies, that's a really kind of scary large number that we really need to kind of make sure we are trying to get under control. So there are programs that go out and try to get these under control and get these plants. And it's a never-ending process to try to get something like this under control, something that we can really manage. And so here's some a little bit of identification. With any of these plants, after a while, the more you look at them, you really can kind of catch them from a distance. And one of the things I always recommend when you're working on plant identification, getting used to things, is get up close. Look at those plants, see what they look like, touch, feel. Take a hand lens if you have to kind of get a glance at it. But with our purple loosestrife, usually we have about 5 to 7 petals. You can see in that picture in the close-up, that's really a great example of kind of a world purple colored. Those leaves on there are opposite. One of the best identification features too that's really beneficial when trying to identify, and you can hopefully see it pretty well in that bottom right hand picture, is that the stem is square And so it should be very easy to kind of feel and see that that's that square stem. And they can get really tall. You know, I'm 5'5", so I'm thinking about a plant that's 5 foot tall. I'm thinking about a plant in flower that's almost my height. That's a really tall plant. So they also do stand out, and a lot of that height comes from the fact that, you know, there's that very large flower stalk as well. And they have a pretty long bloom time, everywhere from about early July to early September. So we have a long potential for, you know, seed production and flowering. And so this is definitely one that we really want to take in control and work with. Now, for interesting point in turn, there is a native loosestrife that is very, very uncommon. We do not see it very often, and this is what's called the winged loosestrife. And it's somewhat similar. It is native. It is smaller. It's only about 2 feet, and you can see that the flowers on it are not as vibrant. They don't quite stand out as much. They're not quite as big, and they do have alternate leaves, whereas our invasive purple loosestrife has opposite leaves. So, you know, how we look at those leaves and how they attach to the stem can be a huge benefit in regards to trying to figure out, you know, how do we identify these plants. Okay. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Andrew, who will continue on with some of our other plants that we have left, the last 3 invasive plants. And then once Andrew's portion is done, we'll take time to kind of go through and take any questions you might have about the plants we've covered tonight. So Andrew, go ahead and you can take control. It's all yours.
All right, thanks, Kari. This is Andrew Holsinger, and I'm going to be presenting a few more plants that are invasive or species of concern. So here we have Oriental bittersweet, and you can see that these leaves are rounded on the end. At the end of the leaves are rounded. They start out when they're immature that they have a slightly tapered end, but as they mature they become rounded. And they're often noted for their yellow fruit. And so the fruit, as you can see on this slide, it occurs all along the stem. Now that's different than the American bittersweet, because American bittersweet, the fruit and the flowers occur on the ends, or the terminal ends of the branches. So here we have another slide of Oriental bittersweet, and you can see how the habit of Oriental bittersweet is climbing up this tree. And the Oriental bittersweet is very aggressive in nature, and will have vines that twine around themselves and around the tree and can girdle the tree. And so it is also a plant that has been commonly misunderstood, with having decorations made from it. So we have helped in a way to spread this plant, because the birds spread this plant. So commonly wreaths are made in the past from this plant, and they have been dispersed. And so you can have a lot of trouble controlling this, because each part of this plant, it can be vegetatively propagated. So it root suckers proliferally, and wherever there's a root sucker, it can continue a new plant. This plant, Oriental bittersweet, was introduced as a horticulture plant from East Asia around the 1860s, and it was widely planted on the East Coast, and it started to be noticed as a highly invasive plant in the early 1900s. And the Oriental bittersweet can spread through and destroy a forest by not only girdling trees, but also shading out and smothering other plants. So here we have an example of the leaves and a close-up picture in the upper right, and you see that these leaves are
coming out of here, not there. Well, now I can hear it. Now I can't hear it, but I did a minute ago.
Okay. So the leaves are simple and alternate, and they have very round leaves when they're mature. And there's a fruit capsule that is distinguished as very yellow on the Oriental bittersweet as compared to the American bittersweet where it is orange. And the native bittersweet has less rounded leaves. Here's another plant that we're going to talk about. It's Euonymus fortunii. And so this is an example of yet another plant that has a climbing habit, and it will form mats and is particularly good as a ground cover, but the ground cover escapes from the ground and works its way to the canopy of the trees. The leaves are opposite and broadly oval, and they're a dark green, but they can also become a more lighter green. Here's a picture of winter creeper euonymus, and here is the fruit capsules. And you'll see these in the winter time, and they dangle in pairs, and they can be pinkish to red, the capsules. And then the photo on the right is the climbing habit, and it will cling to the tree and make its way up the tree. And then it will continue up the tree until it can reach up to 70 feet.
That's nice.
So here's some winter creeper identification. It has opposite leaves. They're broadly oval and slightly toothed. The flowers are very subtle. They're small green yellow flowers. And the fruits are red pink round capsules, and they hold the orange seeds inside, as you can see in the lower right hand corner. And here's another species of euonymus, the winged euonymus or burning bush, Euonymus alatus. And so here you see the vibrant red color of the burning bush, what it's typically sold for. And it's not always true to the brilliant red color that it has. If it's planted in shade, it can sometimes not be have such a vibrant fall color. But the trunk is brown, and it's usually a multi-stemmed trunk. The fruit set on winged euonymus isn't always prolific, but it is spread by birds.
Here you go.
And so it has corky wings or ridges, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner. And that's why it's named winged euonymus. And the leaves are opposite, ovate, and have acute margins. And again, they're slightly toothed. So if you have any questions for Kari and I, feel free to ask questions at this time.
Yep, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. We're going to give about 15 minutes for questions. Type your questions into the chat box, or if you're muted on your phone, *6, or use the little unmute icon that is in the bottom left corner if you're using the microphone through your computer.
Hi, I'm Bernadette Mon, and I have a what's called a Newport pear on my yard, which just started having that fruit in the last 2 years. Is that the same as a calorie pear?
There's a cluster of what are considered ornamental pears, and they all fall into the same kind of group. There are things like you'll hear aristocrat, you'll hear chanticleer, and those all fall into the same family. And so we're all kind of just watching them in general to see. But yeah, they do all fall into that kind of same categorization. But it kind of gives an example of, hey, never set fruit, and all of a sudden it's starting to set fruit. So what's going on? So yeah, that's something. That's why we're kind of sticking that on that species of concern list and kind of keeping an eye on it, because it is a concern. We're like, wait a minute, you're not supposed to do that. But yeah, so it's
I mean, there's so many fruits. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, no, you're not the only one seeing that. Let's see. Somebody asked if we're going to talk about teasel. Teasel is not one of the ones we are going to cover in today's session. But if you do have questions on that, Kathy, please feel free to send us an email. We can definitely get you some more on that in regards to, control or other things if you do. So please feel free to send me an email. You can see both Andrew's email and my email are on this slide. And you should have gotten the email directly from me for how to join the meeting, so you can also email me.
The next question is, what is the problem that winged euonymus presents? And it encroaches into forests and can have a smothering effect of the native plants that exist in the forest, and so it is a species of concern that the birds spread the seeds into the forest, and then it kind of takes over or is spread throughout the forest.
And a lot of times what we see with some of these things, with a lot of the invasives, is they are just able to outcompete a lot of our native plants. And that competition goes for, are they able to tolerate more shade than our natives? And also there's competition for things like moisture as well as nutrients. And sometimes they're just more competitive and just take over. And so sometimes we just have that choking out. So that's the problem with, when we look at the bittersweets and the euonymuses and the potential for calorie pears. It's usually just outcompeting and choking out natives, and it alters, what happens for our wildlife and for nesting sites and preferred feedings. So that's part of the reason we start looking at some of those as well. We have another question of, are these a problem throughout the state or only in your area? And we are seeing these problems, and it's not just Illinois. We do see problems with invasive plants all across the U.S. And one of the things I do say is, there are in other parts of the world plants that have gone and things that have come from us and gone over there and created the same issues. So it's not just here local, in central Illinois. It is throughout the state, and it's one of those things that we want to bring awareness and hope that it's, this is on your radar so you know what you're looking for. And there's definitely more invasive plant species out there than we're going to cover tonight. So there is a lot of great resources. One of the links we sent you should have been a document about various resources about other invasive plants and controls and identification, so that hopefully it will give you some additional guidelines as well.
The next question, so if a home gardener has any of these plants, are we to recommend removal? Well, if they're invasive, you may recommend removal, but it's more of thinking ahead for the future and to find alternatives for possible plants so that we're not creating these kind of problems in the future for future generations. To find those alternatives, in our upcoming webinar, we'll be discussing some alternatives that are available for these plants.
The next question is winged euonymus on the Exotic Weed Act or Noxious Weed Law? And it's not. It is not preventable. Places can still sell this. There's nothing to prevent it. It's one of those ones we're watching and keeping an eye on because we're starting to see invasive tendencies for it. And there are a lot of other plants that have not hit that noxious weed law or the Exotic Weed Act that are recognized in general by the green industry, us in regards to extension, USDA, Illinois Department of Ag, and they know the detrimental sides of it. They just have not been put into the laws or the acts of saying this is invasive. When euonymus is not fully labeled as invasive yet, but it is a species of concern that we're monitoring.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please feel free.
Sure.
Yeah, great. My name's Mike Horsey, DuPage County, Illinois. And our community has lots of Bradford pears, especially in the parkways. Are they considered invasive also?
Bradford pears are technically calorie pears. There's a couple of different names for them.
Okay.
Yeah, and so again, they're still available for sale. There's nothing that's stopping them, and it's what we're just starting to see is just that they're now starting to set seed when they didn't set seed before. We're starting to see them pop up in native areas. As I mentioned, I'm driving along the highway and I'm going, why are there pears there? I know they weren't planted there, So, but they were a very, very, very common landscape plant, and they still are very, very popular. The green industry has still been selling quite a few of them. So, but yeah, calorie pear, Bradford pear, you'll hear aristocrat, chanticleer. There's a couple of different names in regards to varieties that have been produced, but yeah, they all fall into kind of the same category.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Question. Loosestrife. Is that the same as the firefly plant up in Alaska?
I'm not sure.
It looks similar.
And there are plants that do look similar. And I'd have to look into it. And of course, common names are one of those kind of rough and tricky ones because a common name in one place is a common name that doesn't match in the same place. But yeah, if you want to do me a favor, send me an email and I will look into it and I will get you an answer.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. There's a question about gooseneck loosestrife. No, gooseneck loosestrife, as far as I'm aware, is not the same as purple loosestrife and should be fine.
The question before that, burning bush is still very popular. Will it be taken off for the market? Well, that will be a decision made in the future. But as these plants show their invasiveness or have an impact on our environment, it's a thing to consider whether or not they are sold, whether you make a purchase of these plants, depending on how invasive they are and what kind of information is present. Another question is, how did you select these plants as opposed to others like buckthorn? We came up with a list as educators and decided to present these particular species in the time frame that we have to present tonight. Says, what about redbud trees? My neighbors have older redbuds, and I have many of their children volunteer trees. Redbud trees can set seed and produce other trees, but it's not as prolific as these species that we've mentioned here.
Yeah, and redbud is a native. It's a native understory tree, so the way it sets seed is not uncommon. But yeah, redbud is technically a native tree, and so we expect to see it in native areas in the landscape.
A question, I have a winter creeper and planted it 40 years ago. It has thick stem and lots of roots. It's very difficult to pull. It is very difficult to get rid of, and it can root all along its stem and can be vegetatively propagated, and I believe we'll be talking about control in the upcoming session. Burning bush is spread by birds. That can be part of the way that the seeds are spread.
What is a replacement? We're actually going to talk about replacement options and alternatives in the session on February 24th, and that's what we're going to cover then. So we don't want to steal the thunder of those. We're going to be talking on the 24th. The next one, I had purple loosestrife in my mailbox on Rural Road. Never seemed to get aggressive at all, and I've never found it anywhere else. So why is it invasive? It is technically invasive, and the thing is, there are plants that might be similar to it, but traditional loosestrife, purple loosestrife, is very invasive, and we see it very heavily on roadsides and in waterways. It's especially prolific in being invasive on those ends of the spectrum. So there are certain plants that do look similar, but it is on the laws and acts in Illinois is not being able to be sold or planted or propagated.
We'll let the control session handle what to do about honeysuckle on plots that you do not own. And the next question that we didn't mention, kudzu. It is an invasive plant in the South, and it can be quite a drastic change in a forest canopy, and it can be a problem in Illinois, and there has been management of kudzu in Illinois, but it has tended to be in southern Illinois.
Yeah, it has been found in over 30 counties in Illinois, including Cook County. They have found a pocket of it, but it's not one of those ones. We do know it is. We're not supposed to transport it, plant it, etc. in Illinois, and it is one to keep an eye on. But yeah, southern Illinois is more likely to see some of that just because of the temperatures. Let's see, what else do we have? Whether, somebody asked, do the flowers of invasive honeysuckle and native honeysuckle smell the same? And that is a good question, and I don't know if any of the other educators or Andrew online, if you can speak to that, please pop in and answer that. But sadly, I don't know. I wish I did, and I'm going to have to wander around the spring and go smelling and looking for native and invasive honeysuckles and checking what they smell like. So, and hopefully we caught everybody's questions in the chat box. If you have any other questions, we'll give it another minute or two. Feel free to, like I said, unmute your phone by *6 or type in the chat box or unmute your computer and ask. Otherwise, we are going to turn the show over to Chris Enroth and Rhonda Faree, who are going to talk about how to manage and control invasive plants in the home landscape.
Okay, thank you very much, Kari and Andrew. I just want to do a quick check. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay, excellent, wonderful. So good evening. My name's Chris Enroth. I'm a hort educator. I am located in Macomb, Illinois, so that's west central Illinois for most folks here. And what we're going to talk about for the rest of the webinar are managing invasive plants in the home landscape. Pretty much we're talking about controlling them and the different tips and techniques that we can offer to you. I'm going to start out with a bit of an introduction, and we're going to talk about mechanical controls and biological controls. Then Rhonda Faree is going to round out our evening and talk about chemical controls and kind of wrap things up for us. So let's go ahead and get started. So why do we want to manage invasive plants? Well, we really do have the option. Most of us prefer the photograph on the right side of the screen here of a more maintained, more manicured looking landscape, as opposed to the photo on the left where we see, there's actually quite a bit of, looks like honeysuckle there in the background. And I've actually been in wooded situations where you can't even walk into them because the honeysuckle is so dense. And so you can see there on the photo on the right, it's a much more open understory of the woodland. It's more inviting, and you're for someone who has a home on the edge of the woods, it's just a lot of fun to be able to look into the woods and see what's going on, whether you're interested in wildlife or plant life. It's just really fun to have a nice, well-managed landscape. So what we're going to talk about, and what we've already covered, is first of all, what Kari and Andrew talked about was properly identifying the undesirable plants. So identification is the first step whenever we're talking about managing our properties and controlling invasive species. After you identify the plant, you develop a goal or a plan, and based upon goals that you have. Do you want to have a perfectly native landscape, which I will say right now is very difficult, if not impossible, to achieve, or is you want a good balance of native plants and perhaps some exotics but adapted plants that aren't going to be termed as invasive. So you just got to think about what you want on your property and within your landscape. And now what we're going to talk about is control. And there's a lot of factors here. We'll get into these. And then the third step, which is what the second webinar is later in the month, they're going to talk about what we call restoring, or kind of the maintenance side of the ongoing process of managing your landscape for the long term by planting landscape alternatives and fostering a very biodiverse, healthy property and landscape. So let's talk about just a quick example of a very simple plan. So step one, it's what Kari and Andrew talked about. We identify the plant. So let's say we have garlic mustard and we have burning bush on our property. Perhaps right now we can't do anything. It's the winter time, so we're kind of stuck. But once the time comes around, once it is ideal, when we are dealing with garlic mustard, our plan is to remove it mechanically. So we might be mowing it. We'll probably be pulling it by hand, and then possibly also treating with a chemical. And then when we look at the removing honeysuckle or burning bush, we're going to focus more on chemical treatments. And then we are going to come in and replace with native alternatives. And then in year 4, as the shampoo bottle says, rinse and repeat. So this is an ongoing project, so don't think of this as something that we're just going to jump into the landscape, get everything cleaned up, and then we're going to jump out and be able to enjoy it for forever. This is it's going to be an ongoing process, and you're going to need to monitor for regrowth and reincursion of invasive species. So we're going to talk about these 3 options: chemical, mechanical, cultural, biological. I will say right now that there is no one thing fits all. Really, it is a combination of all 3 of these that lead to the most successful type of management plan for a landscape. So let's talk mechanical control right now. And the first part of mechanical control is hand pulling or digging out invasive plant species. And I would say this is probably most effective for smaller areas, so maybe around the home and landscape beds, maybe smaller areas bordering lawns or property or woodland areas. So this is more useful for removing the younger seedlings or maybe small saplings, and also some of the herbaceous invasive plants like garlic mustard. We do, there's a lot of events around the country of garlic mustard pulls, and so there's a lot, garlic mustard control is a lot of hand pulling and digging. And this is also another reason why identification of the invasive species is so critical, like what Kari and Andrew talked about. You have to be able to not only identify the plant in its big adult mature stage, but you also have to be able to identify it in the younger, more immature juvenile stage, so you can really get a jump on them before they get a jump on you. And as far as hand pulling or digging, there's not really much timing here. I mean, with garlic mustard, you really want to get it before it sets seed, but pull as often as you need. Next, we have the kind of a different, our little toys that we can use out in the landscape here to help us remove shallow rooted woody type plants. And this uses a thing, and then the quote that I think of is probably one of my favorite science quotes out there, is by Archimedes, and he says, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." And essentially what he's talking about is leverage, and that's what we're using here is leverage. There are a variety of tools that we can purchase out there on the internet, or maybe even in a local garden store. You can see here we have the uprooter, the honeysuckle popper, the extractigator, we have the puller bear, and the weed wrench. And they all are a little bit different, but they really use the same mechanism for removing the plants, and that is leverage. And then we have another technique, and that is suffocation. Now, suffocation is using some type of material to cover the surface of the soil, and where the invasive plant's growing, it restricts water, light, and air from reaching the surface of the soil or the plant. This can work, but there are some cons. It might not always work because once the area is uncovered and exposed to water, light, and air, the roots, they might still be alive underneath the soil and they could reestablish, or at the very least, there might be dormant seed that has just been lying in wait from that invasive plant, and once it's exposed to the environment there, it will easily germinate again. So there is another technique similar to suffocation, but it's called soil solarization. And this is where we actually spread a clear sheet of plastic over the soil to trap heat underneath and within the soil. And a lot of folks use this, down south. It's a big thing to kill a lot of soil-borne diseases and pests. And soil solarization has some criteria. So let's talk about that here on the next slide. So when we want to solarize our soil, I will just say it works better if you are more down in the southern portions of Illinois as opposed to northern portions, just simply because it gets warmer down there, and there's a longer season for that area to bake. But if you're interested in trying a soil solarization, first thing you want to do is you cultivate the area with a tiller. You want to work it up really well, and then you need to rake out the area. And what I mean by rake it out is you really want to smooth the surface out and make sure that it's kind of at the final grade that you want it to be, because once you go in and you solarize the soil, and you don't want to take the plastic off and then till it again, which will then expose dormant weed seeds which are just a little bit deeper down in the soil, and now you still kind of have the same problem that you started out with. So rake out the area, grade it to how you want it, and then you're going to want to avoid tillage or really deep tillage after that. The second step after you've raked it out is to saturate the soil with water. Now water has a big thermal mass and it will hold, and it takes a while to heat up, but once it gets hot it will retain that heat, and it will be you'll be able to bake that soil for a longer period of time. So you saturate with water, you cover this area with a clear sheet of plastic, and you seal the edges usually by burying them, and then you allow it to bake. And for southern Illinois, one season. In northern Illinois, definitely one season. You might even have to extend that to 2 whole seasons that it's under the plastic, because it's a much shorter growing season. And this is just an example of a residence where they're using soil solarization here in their front yard. They're probably killing off maybe a lawn or something, but I just wanted to show everybody an image of what it actually looks like there. And it's good more for a smaller space, like you can see in the image, as opposed to a huge prairie plot area. And then we have mowing or cutting. This is useful for a lot of herbaceous weeds like teasel. But with teasel, you want to make sure to mow prior to flowering so that you are able to remove any chance of that seed to form. And then for woody plants, sometimes repeatedly cutting back the vegetation to the ground will exhaust the root system as it continually sends up suckers, and it will eventually kill the plant. Again, that is a good option for maybe a smaller planting bed, but not a good option if you're managing several acres worth of woodland, because you won't be able to keep up with the amount of suckers that, say, something like honeysuckle sends up. So we'll have to look at different options as far as that. But sometimes an area can be so overgrown and so dense that mowing or some type of cutting or a removal of the vegetation is the only option to gain access, so you can then really begin your control program. So also, a question that often comes up is, how do I dispose of all these materials? I've chopped off my honeysuckle and I've hauled it away and I don't know what to do with it. Well, we talked about this before, and Rhonda and I both agree the best thing that you can do with a lot of the woody plant material is you can either rent a chipper shredder, or maybe you have a neighbor that has one, but the best thing is to chip it up and reuse it as mulch in your garden beds or somewhere like that. Another thing you can do is you can chip it up again, or you pile it up to create compost. A third option here is to burn it, but first, please find out if you can burn where you're at. A lot of people can't do that in the city limits. And another thing, make sure that you do have a designated burn area, because you might run into issues of destroying soil biota if you burn too much and that area gets too hot. And then, of course, check with any local municipality or counties to ask if they have disposal programs for invasive plants. Some plants cannot be composted, though. So an example here, garlic mustard, if you pull it and it is flowered, the flower will continue to develop and set seed even after it's been pulled. So in the case of garlic mustard, you really have to either burn it or bag it. They can haul it away to the trash, or you can bag it and solarize it yourself. Or you can do like my friend and colleague Rhonda Faree does, and she makes a wonderful garlic mustard pesto, because it is an edible weed. So we're going to get into now the cultural and biological control options that are at your disposal. And the first one is the biological control, and this is where we release an invasive plant's natural predator from back where it's from, and we use that to control its spread. And there really aren't very many good examples of where this has been successful, except with purple loosestrife. They have introduced the purple loosestrife beetle and a couple other leaf and root feeding insects that do feed off of purple loosestrife, and they are seeing successes in areas where purple loosestrife has invaded. But purple loosestrife is still a very, very difficult one to control because it invades primarily wetland areas, and wetland areas can be very sensitive to some of the control options that we need to resort to. Grazing is another option that is becoming more popular, it seems, in the U.S. Rotational grazing can be part of your management plan, and overgrazing can cause a bigger problem than invasive species with all of the large mammals like cows, horses, and people do use bison to graze, but they disturb the soil and they might expose again more weed seed that germinates, and you might have problems with that and erosion. But there is an alternative here that we're seeing to be very popular in the landscape industry, and that is people are hiring out goats and sheep to help control invasive plant species. And actually, according to a report by the BBC, a herd of 35 goats can go through a half acre of dense vegetation in 4 days. Now that is pretty impressive, and they will chomp on plants that we won't even get near, plants that have thorns, plants that are toxic like poison ivy that we don't want by us. And so goats and sheep, they take care of these things for us. And so I want to show an image here, and this is a study done by Missouri State University. And it is an experimental site, and the entire area was completely overgrown with multiflora rose. And you can see there are 3 plots here on the screen. And so on the far left is where cattle graze alone by themselves. And the little red arrows here are pointing to where they left behind the multiflora rose. They didn't want to touch it. They want to go there. The middle strip there is it's a control area, and you can see what the entire hillside would have looked like, and researchers said they couldn't even get in there really to do a vegetative transects to actually determine how many multiflora roses are still there. It was so dense. And then if we go to the far right of the picture, you can see the area where they grazed both goats and cattle, and there are no multiflora rose bushes left. So I just think that is a really neat image and study to show to you. I don't know if in your area if there are landscapers that hire out herds of goats, but I just think that is a really interesting way to look at controlling our area. And a lot of, just to add, a lot of individuals that manage goat herds and sheep herds, they do say that it's the goats themselves do not do the control. It is, again, a combination of techniques. And then we get into controlled burning, and what this does, it removes present vegetation, and we hope that it promotes desired vegetation, but it doesn't work for all areas. And I'll use a honeysuckle again as an example. It can be used to clear out very dense plantings of honeysuckle, but it will not get hot enough to destroy the root system in most cases. And so you will once again get these sprouts coming from the root system, and you will have to go back in again to treat. Safety is a concern, and you always need to make sure that you have a fire plan. And if you're new to controlled burning at all, you need to make sure that you consult with, your local county or municipality, fire department or volunteer fire department, and any soil and water offices, and NRCS and IDNR. And they have a lot of information out there. Extension also has information that we can give you on controlled burns. Another one I throw in here, I kind of like this one. It's flame weeding. These are just actually little devices which you can buy or even make. That there's simply a propane little canister on one end. On the other end, you pull the trigger and a little blue flame comes out, and it burns and desiccates a very small area. As you can see in the photo here, it's kind of works better for like in a paved area, between pavers or something like that. But you can also use this for spot treating on larger properties. And there are some individuals who I know that maintain prairie that refuse to actually pull or dig out any invasive plants because they know that once they do that, they'll disturb the soil and there may potentially be more invasive weed seed in there. And so they opt more for either targeted chemical control or something like this, a more targeted flame weeding application. Okay, so that's all I have for this portion, and I will let Rhonda Faree take over.
Thanks, Chris. We're going to finish up tonight with chemical control. I think it goes without saying that we always try to use the non-chemical options whenever possible. And, a lot of us will do a lot of non-chemical controls, but unfortunately, some of these species that we've covered and also others that you're battling at home and have dealt with are really difficult. And so sometimes we do have to resort to the chemicals. Not everyone's comfortable with that, and you have to really make the choices that meet your needs and your beliefs. I think it also goes without saying that we have to use the right chemical in the right place. And choose the right chemical. And so we'll cover a few examples of chemicals that are used in these types of control situations. And I'll try to cover, a few tips as we go along the way that I've learned along the way as well. And we'll talk a little bit also about some safety concerns when using chemicals. There are some reentry intervals that are often listed on labels that we have to be sure that we're careful with. A reentry interval says that how long a person needs to stay out of a recently treated area. They're more common on food crops, but it's possible that there could be a reentry interval on some of these products as well. So, usually our rule of thumb is to stay out of an area until a spray is dried or a dust is settled. But we do know that chemicals really are often the most effective and resource-efficient tool to treat these invasive plants. Chemicals use obviously less labor, usually less time, and actually sometimes they're more economical. So we'll try to help you here to understand some of those products, but more importantly, how to use them properly so that you can meet those goals that Chris was talking about earlier, and obviously so that we have a really limited impact on our environment and on the humans that are using those areas. I can't really cover everything, obviously, in tonight's session. We have, whole semester classes on how to deal with pesticides. And, of course, if you're a certified pesticide applicator, you know that we do 1 and 2 day long seminars and programs just on dealing with how to apply pesticides properly. But a couple of terminology things I wanted to cover here tonight, just some basic terminology for homeowner products that you're going to be and again, the audience tonight is, as we were opening this up tonight, really our first time just to master volunteers. So out there listening are master gardeners and master naturalists. So as you're working in your yards or you're helping other people to deal with these situations, here's just some basic terminology to deal with for the homeowner products that you and your clientele will be able to purchase. You can buy these either as a concentrate, and a concentrate obviously is one that you're going to then mix that concentrate with water or some other carrier before you apply it, and you're going to put it into some other type of a spray container. Usually it's water, but there are some of these products that are used in especially woody control that might be mixed with diesel fuel or oil or some other type of a carrier. But again, that would be listed on the label. There are also ready-to-use products, and for homeowners, a lot of times, and for me as well, I mean, I find that sometimes the ready-to-use product is really the most convenient and easiest for me, and so those are available as well. And I'll cover a few of those examples as we go along here. Just wanted to give you a couple of words of caution. In the 26 some years I've been doing extension education, and I've been working in pesticide safety education in most of those years. The labels on pesticides have changed so much. The formulations have changed a lot. They are really, as you know, they're really quite complicated. There are also all these buzzwords that are out there that make it even more confusing. And so I would caution you when you see some of these statements like extended control, think about what that really is. Extended control there's a couple of ways that they achieve that. One would be that it's a product that has some soil activity, and maybe it's a product that stays active in the soil for a period of time. So if you apply it and it kills that plant, it's still going to be active in the soil. So if a tree's roots are nearby, it might come into that area, and it could damage the existing plants that you want to keep. It could also have soil activity so it prevents any new plants from seeding, including desirable plants. Obviously, we might want to prevent, some plants from reseeding, but we don't want a bare soil area typically. So extended control, kind of really, think about what that is doing, and is that really what you're trying to achieve? The other one I kind of caution you about is when it says rapid burn down. And rapid burn down usually is just that it will kill the plant or the plant parts very, very quickly. People are, impatient. We want to see that product work really fast. It used to be when I was doing landscape maintenance, probably 30 years ago, the old Roundup formulations, they took a long time to work. And the way they have them formulated now, they work faster. But there are some products that could work too fast. And so if it works too fast, it may not actually have the systemic activity that we want it to have, or maybe it's just going to kill the plant above the ground and not move into the roots. So think about how that product is actually working. The label can help you with that, or some of the internet searches, some of the resources that we've provided can give you more information about these products. We're going to look at two different options tonight. There are more, obviously, and there are more that are used really specifically for these types of either woody removals, invasive removals, but the two that I'm going to really cover tonight are the most common that you're going to use in these situations, and those would be foliar and cut surface. So I'm going to go through those, a little bit of detail on each of those. Let's start with foliar. Just like it says, it's a herbicide. Again, the herbicide is a type of pesticide that's used to kill plants. So it's an herbicide that is applied to the leaves of the plant. It would then kill that plant part or the entire plant, depending on how that product works. Usually for most foliar treatments, where you're going to be applying it to the plant when it's in leaf, that it's best to control really small plants. Usually it's best to control the seedlings of a woody plant. Maybe it's, those Bradford pears or the calorie pears have started to come up where we don't want them to, or I'll tell you, I have a burning bush. Actually, I have two burning bush. Some of those pictures tonight were from my yard. And I have little burning bushes coming up everywhere, and so it's just become out of control. So actually, that's one that I have in my long-range plan to try to remove and to replace in my property. So again, those little seedlings that are coming up, if I can hit them when they're young, and with the foliar treatment, it might work a little better. Also, the foliar treatments might work better on some herbaceous plants than it would on the woody plants. Typically, these products, obviously, they have to penetrate that leaf cuticle. And so it's usually, and again, you have to check the label, but it's usually most effective to do a foliar treatment just after those leaves first expand in the spring. If you think about it, when those leaves first expand, they're really, the cuticle's fairly thin. It hasn't totally developed. And so usually the plant, the herbicide can get in a little bit better. Obviously, the caution that you see here on the slide is that we spray only the plants we want to get rid of. And I know that seems like common sense, but some of these products are total vegetation control types of products like Roundup. And so it kills, ideally, it would kill all vegetation that it touches. So be careful, if it's a bittersweet vine that's kind of spread all over, there might be some plants underneath there that you want to keep or that you want to establish once you get rid of the bittersweet, or the same with maybe the Euonymus coloratus. So being careful to make sure we know what we're really trying to get rid of. And that's true also. We'll cover some products here that are actually selective in that they control only broadleafs and not grasses, but they're going to control all broadleafs. So, I may want to control, again, the bittersweet, but not the other broadleafs that are in the area. So really be careful with those. Some other tips for success when using foliar treatments. I always really try to emphasize that a plant needs to be actively growing for it to take up that herbicide and move that chemical through its system, hopefully killing that whole plant. In a lot of times, those plants are really in a dormancy in the summer, and so a foliar leaf type of application, when you put it onto those leaves, if a plant's in its summer dormancy, it's just kind of sitting there, it may not move the chemicals through the system like you want it to. So often those applications work better in the spring, or in some cases, some recommendations may be for particular plants to do a fall application. It may be that we're trying to control a winter annual that germinates in the fall, but it also might be that we're trying to control an herbaceous perennial that moves its reserves to its roots over the winter to overwinter as it moves the reserves to the roots in the fall, it would move the herbicide with it, and sometimes we can get better control in the fall for some plants. So again, just make sure that the plant or the weed or whatever you want to call it that you're trying to get rid of is really actively growing. Watch the weather. Obviously, we want to make sure that we don't drift these spray applications to other plants on our property or on our neighboring properties. And then also watch the weather to see if there's rain or, if we're going to have some kind of a weather system come through that could wash that spray into an area that we don't want it to be and not be effective. We'll obviously be wasting money and maybe causing some harm that that is unintended. The other tip on foliar applications, and I know a lot of you sitting out there, have done some master volunteer projects where you're doing maybe a prairie restoration, and so you're going out and doing selective controls. And some people have found that a special applicator is helpful. There are some, special wiping wands that are available so that you're really trying to target that application right onto the leaves where you need it to be so that it doesn't drift and cause problems elsewhere. Again, the resource list, which you should have a handout for, gives websites that really discuss exactly how to control various species of concern, the ones we're covering tonight, and then also others, including what method to use and also some timing. The other method I wanted to cover tonight are cut surface applications. And cut surface applications are, again, just like the name says, we're going to cut either a whole tree down like you see here with this large tree stump, or maybe we're just cutting the honeysuckle branches back, or we're cutting the bittersweet back, or the coloratus back. And so then to prevent it from resprouting, we actually treat that cut surface area. A couple of tips on that would be that it's helpful if you do that immediately after you cut. Usually within 2 to 3 hours before that plant really starts to seal itself. Just like when we get cut, we form a scab and that wound starts to heal. The trees do the same. They will start to form some wound material, scar tissue, and so that could actually seal out that cambium area, and the chemical can't get in as well as we would like it to. So make sure that we do that pretty quickly, again within a few hours. And then, in the spring when the maples are really flowing, a lot of sap, like right now, hopefully some people are out there getting some maple syrup. I've seen a lot of Facebook posts on that. If the maples are really flowing a lot of sap, they can actually wash the chemical out and just waste that chemical. If it's a large tree, you can think about it here. You can see how on this picture the spray is only done on the cambium, only where it's going to re-sprout from. We don't need to spray the heartwood right in the middle where nothing's going to grow from. We only want to spray that cambium area just inside the bark where the xylem and phloem are, and so where those buds are and where the new plants will re-sprout from. So, just kind of the outer 2 inches, that saves chemical. And then, as you can see from this picture, adding dye can be really helpful to know where you've been. I have 7 acres of prairie that we have in CRP prairie, and our family goes out and we're cutting, plants that typically it's woody plants that we don't want to have there. And we'll go along and cut, and then we go back and treat, and you can't see where you've treated unless you have this dye. So that the dye can be very helpful. It could be some of these products come with a dye already in them, especially some of the ready-to-use products, or you could use a food coloring or a clothing colorant type of product. The handout that you should have received when Kari sent out your materials for tonight, Chris and I did a handout on chemical options, or the invasive plants and how to control them. The front, you can see, covers the chemical, the 2 examples that I gave, and then the information that Chris covered. The second half of that handout, we do have some chemical recommendations and just a little bit of information there. So I would encourage you to pull that out and look at it if you have that available, or look at it later. We're going to cover really 3 main products tonight, or active ingredients, herbicides, glyphosate, triclopyr, and then picloram. And there also are some combination products that are shown on your handout. As you know, there are lots and lots and lots of trade names out there, so there was no way we could ever list all of them. And again, that just goes back to you need to look at the ingredient statement of these products to really see what's in there. And there's a lots of different combination, different things going on out there. So really know your product that you're using. The glyphosate, the Roundup products are non-selective. Ideally, they're going to kill any part of a plant that it touches. It is a systemic product, so it does move within the plant. Now, a Roundup or a glyphosate product is not a real strong systemic activity, but it does have enough that it usually will work in these situations.
I think it'll go to later class.
It will, glyphosate is absorbed through the leaves, or it can be actually absorbed through the cut stems and then move into other parts of the plant. So it is one that we use as a cut surface application. Glyphosate has no soil activity, and that can be a plus and a minus, and typically that's what we want. We are only trying to be really careful and specifically treat a plant with this product, and we don't need any soil activity to control any other seeds or roots that are in that area. Glyphosate really binds very, very quickly to soil and doesn't have any residual activity. Triclopyr is actually really closely in the same chemistry as like a 2,4-D. It's a phenoxy type of product. It's one of those like a 2,4-D. It controls broadleafs and not grasses, so it's a selective type of activity. is similar to Roundup. You apply it to the leaves or to the cut stems, and then it moves into the plant. Again, has some systemic activities. Systemic meaning that it moves within the plant to other plant parts, killing other plant parts. It does have limited soil activity, and some of that might be dependent on what it's mixed with. Some of these are pre-mixes that are available for purchase. The picloram is a product that you can see listed on your handout. That one is usually sold as Tordon. It's, as you can see here on the slide, Tordon RTU, which means ready to use. I find it in my farm stores or my box stores, the garden centers, available for sale. It's in a squeeze bottle, and then I can just, and it's already got a dye in it, and you can just kind of squeeze it right out on a cut surface. So usually it is used mainly for a cut, as you can see on your handout, a cut stem or stump type of application. It does have some soil activity, so I would caution you, and I learned, the hard way, just like everybody else. I've had a lot of trouble with bittersweet in my yard, and so I've had to go in and I've tried digging and cutting like Chris talked about. But in some cases, I did just really need to use some chemical, and as careful as I tried to be, there were some cases where I killed some parts of plants that I didn't want to kill, and so, but that was just a risk that I had to take to get rid of that particular problem that I was dealing with. This is the back side of that handout, and it covers, those products that I just mentioned in a couple of the, at least the one combination. You can see on those trade names in that second column that they're all very similar, so they Roundup Pro, Roundup Grass and Weed Killer, the Roundup Poison Ivy, and Tough Brush Killer Plus is that combination one. And so again, really, you have to look at the ingredient statement to see what's in there. And then I've just listed some plant groups that might be used for those products, and then the application techniques that we've discussed. Things to consider. Again, you have to think about the aesthetics, and some of these products will kill all of the plants. And so if you kill an entire area, if you kill, an entire area with a foliar application, for example, it's going to cause what we call a brownout, and it's going to look like you killed an area of plants, or you may kill an entire area and cause a hole in your landscape. So again, as Chris talked in the beginning, really have a plan in place so that you know how you're going to strategically work through this removal and then replacements that they'll talk about in a couple of weeks. Cost is always a deciding factor. Environmental impacts are certainly a factor, that we never use herbicides, unless it's necessary. And again, check those labels carefully, because some of the products do have toxicity to fish or bees or other, animals. So really be careful of what those environmental impacts say. And some of these labels are going to say do not, use on wet areas. They are very specific on where they're labeled. Personal safety, always wear long sleeves, long pants, shoes and socks, gloves, a hat. And make sure that we're all covered. With even these homeowner products, I want you to cover everything up so that we are really safe. And then there are some legal issues that I'll cover in a minute. Just finishing up here then, a couple of things. Following the label, I hope, and I hope I did, overemphasize the importance of reading a label, because it is actually the law. In our country, the label is the law, which means that if you do something that is not on the label, or you do something against what the label says, it actually, you are breaking the law. So read those labels carefully. They change, and you have to make sure that you are reading the most current label for that product that you've purchased. It will also say what area you can use that product on. So if it says that you can use it in maybe a non-cropped area for controlling invasives, then it's okay. But if it says you can only use it on, a vegetable garden, then you can't use it in another spot. It has to have that location listed on the label. It will tell you how to apply the product, how to time it, and obviously, I think you all know that rates are important, but more is not better. In some cases, more is worse. These are very specifically formulated. So follow those labels carefully. Now, since we have master volunteers on here tonight, I did want to cover just a little bit about licensing. It's again a complicated thing, but we do have people that work in pesticide safety education and extension who can help further if you have questions. If you're applying a general use product on private property, then you do not have to have a license. And a product will say specifically on the label if it is restricted use or if it's general use. If it's general use, it usually doesn't say anything, but if it says that it is a restricted use product, then it is only for use by a certified applicator. Anyone you could use a restricted use product on your private property, but you would have to have a private pesticide applicator license to do that. You can also use just a regular product you buy at the box store or the garden center and treat someone else's property, but that whenever you do that, then you are falling under what Illinois calls a commercial use. So obviously if you're paid, that's a commercial use, you need a commercial license. But in public application, actually, there are situations where you may need a license or some special training. And then for not-for-hire type of situations, like a community garden, actually, if you're applying products on a community garden, just as an example, and it's not your property, then actually, technically, you do need a not-for-hire commercial license. There is a special exemption that's been around for a few years for controlling invasives with herbicides on public land. And so instead of doing the whole licensing process, there's a special training exemption that those applicators are given special training once a year. There was a question earlier about how to control what you do to control plots that you don't own if honeysuckle's growing on another plot, and there really is no law for that since honeysuckle is not on our noxious weed law. The weeds that are listed on our Noxious Weed Act you're required by law to control those on land that you own or work on, and so there are some ways to take care of that. But if it's not on that noxious weed law, then there's really not a whole lot you can do. Just one other legal thing before we open it up for questions is that if you're applying to a property, an herbicide and you're trying to control weeds on a plant, and then for some reason that contacts water, that's considered a different type of application. If it contacts water and it actually flows off the property, then you actually also need a special permit from the Illinois EPA to make that application, even on a private property. So just want to make you aware that wet areas, we have to be extra careful. Just ending up here then, management resources we have in that list for you. I encourage you to go look at those, and there are some that talk specifically about a plant like this one, let's say, and it will give you very, really kind of almost step-by-step how to control that particular species. So in the case of teasel, Chris mentioned that it has a lot of seed production. So we, really our goal is to make sure we mow it before it blooms so that we can stop those seeds from producing those thousands and thousands and thousands of seeds and putting more seed into our soil. There are chemicals that are used, and then once we control it, it's really important that we go back and put in a plant that we want to keep, a seed in grasses for competition, for example. And they've had some success with this on roadsides. Coming up in 2 weeks then, Martha Smith and Jennifer Fishburne will cover landscape alternatives, and then we'll end up our series with pollinator plants by Kelly Alsop and Ken Johnson. So we hope that you'll all join us again in a couple of weeks. Questions for Chris and myself on control?
Rhonda, I'll go ahead and kind of catch you up here on what's going on in the chat box. Mike says, commenting on the spot treating with flame weeder, he says MAP gas works better for spot burning, expensive though, and it's expensive because they actually don't manufacture that in the United States anymore, and it's a more stable version of accelerant, and so you obviously you'll pay more money, but they say it does burn hotter. Lynn asks about the black locust tree, and Lynn does mention that it is invasive. I would say, again, it's not necessarily one of those exotic invasives that we think of, but you still have a question about controlling it. So keeping the tree growing after you cut it down, especially weed tree. The thing I would say is, yes, my sister had a black locust in her backyard, cut it down, and you can treat the stump there with some type of chemical, but then you also have to deal with the suckers that we saw come up from the root system. And so actually there we just did mowing and clipping off any little pieces that we saw coming up from the soil there and from the stump. And that's how we were able to control it. You can use other products though, like a glyphosate product on it as well. And then Rhonda, Sue asked about what do we mean by soil activity. I don't know if you want to take that.
Yeah, I can cover that. Really not the products I covered tonight have very limited soil activity, but we do have, if you've ever used the product Preen, for example, a very common homeowner herbicide, it's applied to the soil and then it stays active in the soil for a period of time, and it actually acts on the germinating seed, so it prevents the seeds from growing through that barrier that it creates. Crabgrass controls are very similar. They have, they're put on the soil and they prevent the germinating seed. We also have some soil sterilants though, and those I have to be even more cautious with. Soil sterilants can remain active in the soil maybe 6 months, for example, and they can kill very large trees. So again, just making sure we know how that product works. Chris, I noticed the next question here, Kimberly asked that we're not seeing these chemicals listed in our pest management for the home landscape. Excellent question, Kimberly. We don't have a lot of chemicals listed in that handbook, but you can share this information that we're giving you tonight with your clients.
Mm-hmm. And the chemical, whatever you recommend, and if you're very unsure, always you can look it up online and just make sure that it is a general use pesticide that will be available to the homeowner.
I can't ask about the shelf life for the chemicals, and some of them, they probably do have a shelf life, but it's probably pretty long. My concern would be more whether it's been stored properly. Some of them, if you look at the labels, you cannot let them freeze or get too hot. So I would, just like you're storing seed, make sure we're storing the chemicals properly.
Mm-hmm. And always look for in your local area, if you're lucky, you have some type of hazardous waste disposal, and hopefully they'll take something like that. And that's how, if you have some that you feel are expired, we don't dump them down the drain. We want to make sure that we dispose of them properly.
Rick, a question out there about spraying Roundup and being able to plant within 7 days. Actually, Roundup has no soil activity. It binds up very tightly, so you can actually plant pretty much right away. You probably wouldn't even have to wait 7 days unless it has something else mixed in with it. But if it's just by itself, it shouldn't be a problem after it's dried.
Then Mary talks about keeping buckthorn at bay on a 5-acre oak and shagbark hickory forest, repeatedly using brush cutter and glyphosate, any other chemical other than glyphosate. I'm thinking triclopyr, sorry, would be another chemical option. And then knowing, I guess, how many suckers and sprouts you're getting from the soil there, again, coming and cutting. A fire might be successful at keeping those down. That's kind of all the options that I can think of right now.
Yeah, I think I would try, maybe the combination, the tough brush killer that we listed on our handout, or like you say, one of the brush masters that are listed, or maybe that Tordon product that you would just apply that liquid to those cuts that you make. So if Roundup doesn't seem to be giving you good enough systemic activity for control, then maybe one of those others could work for you.
Next up, so if my brother, for example, asked me to help him kill weeds on his property with a pesticide, I couldn't without a license. Well, Rhonda, what do you think?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
If you're just working with your family, I think there's actually, if you read the law, there are some information about how many family members, but I don't know that off the top of my head, but you should be fine.
Okay. And then George asks about teasel spreading as much downstate as it seems to be up in Lake County. And George, I'll say that as I drive home, I live pretty close to my office. I only live 1.25 miles away, and I see teasel all over. And so I'm seeing it here in Central Illinois, and I'm sure folks are seeing it throughout the state. But I'd have to let them report on that. But I think that they even sell teasel online. Is that true? They're selling teasel seed online for decorative purposes?
Probably, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The last question, Paula, attempting to get rid of winter creeper, that is obviously a ground cover, and then it also is climbing up your trees. And Paula, I'm not going to lie to you, that's a very difficult situation. It's going to take a long time and a lot of effort. So a lot of cutting, a lot of treating, but it can be done. I know of a property in Springfield where they had, it was everywhere. Actually, it still is in parts of it. And they're slowly going in and removing it and the honeysuckle, but and then just slowly treating that and trying to get it under control. But I know of a property here in the town I live in that is completely covered in that winter creeper. So it's not a quick fix. It's going to take some time.
And they're, especially for a lot of these ground cover plants, and their leaves are very waxy. You have to be very careful if you're applying some type of an herbicide, because with that waxy leaf surface, they can sometimes just shed that herbicide right off. So you might have to purchase some type of herbicide additive, or maybe if there's one pre-mixed to help it bind more to the leaf surface.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. And your garden centers can help you if it needs an extra, like you said, additive, a spreader or a sticker or a penetrant of some sort.
Yes.
Gosh, Chris, I think we got through all those questions.
Excellent.
Anybody on the phone?
Okay. Well, I want to just remind everybody, and we'll be here for another couple minutes if you have questions. But don't forget, we do have the next session coming up in 2 weeks. I'll back up to that slide here, right there. I have to take over. I forgot. So yes, so coming up February 24th, these two webinars, we talked about identification control. Now we're going to talk about managing and alternatives for the landscape and promoting a diverse landscape. And just in case you want to sit through this again, or maybe you missed part of it, or you want to invite a friend maybe to hear this, we will be repeating this series once again in April. The exact same program that you heard tonight, the exact same one that they will have on February 24th, we will have on April 7th and April 21st. So and then that will be open to the general public. I know there's a lot of master volunteers on tonight, so feel free to spread the word for those April programs. And I guess on behalf of everybody, all the educators here, just thank you very much for joining us tonight, and have a good night.
Thank you. You good night too. Thank you.